So most of you know where Ireland is. It's a tiny country, but yet meat is so important. It's worth over 2 billion of our exports. And in fact, the pressure we're under now is that 9 out of 10 cattle we produce must be exported. We only are self-sufficient in 10% of what we produce. So therefore, international markets are huge. And I need to mention our biggest market is actually the UK. And that itself is presenting big unknown issues. One of the main things I want to stress here is, before I'm speaking on behalf of a research organisation that's publicly owned, part of our Department of Agriculture, but before we used to do a lot of research, and then that research, you know, was pushed towards the industry. And the industry would pick and choose, and then hopefully there'd be some impact. And that's a model that's been used quite a bit in Europe and around the world. However, what we've done more recently is that with the full engagement of the industry, we've identified real potential areas. And these aren't new research areas. These are latent research results that are in, as I often call them, PDF, international peer-reviewed publications, which no one can read except scientists. So there's big amount of knowledge in there. So what we're trying to do is identify markets, look at the research that can meet those markets, so that the development phase with the industry and working in partnership with the industry has impact. And people say, what does impact mean? Is it environmental? Is it sustainability? Is it? But really, if people are in business, which many of you are, there's only one impact, and it's the bottom line, because there won't be any other impact if you don't meet the bottom line. So really, we're very much focused on impact in terms of either efficiency, new markets, new products, and most of all, profit. Now, the other issue is the meat technology, the world of meat technology. We're not dealing with the pharmaceutical arena. We're not dealing with the aviation or airspace area. And therefore, the whole technology advancement within the meat area is quite basic compared with all the other sectors, but yet is often treated the same. So really, I often mention that we have a knife, we have a pH meter, and we have a thermometer. And that's almost a lot of the technology you'd see in terms of in meat processing plants, at least in the 60s and 70s, etc. And have we moved far enough away from that to rely on those? And my answer is absolutely. And I think the work here in Australia by the AMPC and the MLA have really shown that we've gone way beyond this, and equally ourselves in Ireland. But if you look at around the world, they're still really dependent on those three instruments. So that's just the outline of the conversation I'm going to have. I'll be fairly quick because I have a lot to say, like a lot of Irish people. So I won't even go down this. This presentation is available to anyone who wants it afterwards. So Teagasc, as was amply pronounced by our MC there, is a state agency. It's the beauty of being in a state agency is you have the minister and our prime minister looking down on us, but we are tasked with this, which is to support science-based innovation to the Irish food industry. And that means we have the industry on the other side. And while people say that's a bit of a squash, a bit of a pressure, a bit of mixed messages, it's actually really interesting working within that space at the moment, because it's taxpayers' money we're funded on mainly, or industry-funded money. So therefore, impact is really important. But it's under the custodian of the Minister of Agriculture, and that's really important. So our Teagasc organisation, one of the interesting features of it, and I won't go into great detail, is it has direct links with the farmers. We also have what we call a advisory service or farm knowledge transfer service. So we have a group of advisors, but also specialist advisors. And those specialist advisors actually do research. Up to about 25–50% of their job is research. The other 50% is full engagement with the farming community. And that gives a direct link between the farming and the production right through the laboratories, the research, and indeed the markets. And that's a two-way communication. So really I'm only demonstrating that even though we're a small country, we do have 140,000 farmers. We have 45,000 paying client farmers who really demand visits, demand knowledge, and get the information transferred directly. We also have experimental farms, we have research farms, and we also have what we call the better farms. And these are commercial farms owned by farmers who open their gates to allow other farmers get to the level where they feel is best practice, whether it's growing, rotation, husbandry, whatever. And again, that links right up the chain to the food processor, to the meat processors. So in fact, we work hand in hand with the meat processing sector in talking to these farmers. So our research program is, hitting on these particular areas. Our biggest asset in Ireland isn't oil or diamonds or coal. As many of you know, it's actually rain and grass. And from the rain and grass, we have a competitive advantage in terms of feed. So an awful lot of our research revolves around how we can get the most from our grass production. And that's why our biggest sectors are dairy and beef. So in terms of the government strategies, as I said to a few people already this morning, it's easy to develop a strategy. The problem is actually implementing the strategy, and more so, people to take the responsibility for the implementation of the strategy. So we have a lot of strategies there, research prioritization, action plan for jobs, our innovation that's meant to have best experience of research and talent, etc. But they're not worth anything unless the stakeholders take ownership of the strategy. So one of our main food and recent strategies is called FoodWise 2025. And again, that was developed by a whole chain approach and a whole stakeholder approach. So that's including the meat industry, the dairy industry, the academics, the agencies, and the NGOs, in fact. So they together developed the FoodWise strategy. That is monitored on a bi-monthly basis directly by the Minister himself. So the Minister of Agriculture chairs a meeting of the CEOs of all either the meat processing representatives as well as the agencies, etc. And there's goals and targets. I'll just take two sentences from that strategy. And basically that researchers will not get any more funding unless they include market insights into their research. That's public research. There's room for competitive Blue Skies research, and that's a different agency. But in terms of the Department of Agriculture's research, unless there's solid market insights and targets within research projects, it won't get funding. And the second thing is recognized that to even maintain what we have in terms of exports and production, we need to invest in R&D and embrace technologies on the ground. That's in the processing, on the farm, and in the business as a whole. So, why do we do all this? The target set in FoodWise is really ambitious. It's actually to increase our exports by something like, well, it's from 8 million, or it was actually about 10 billion in 2012 to 14, up to 19 billion, which is a target for 2025. And that's in terms of value. And we are making headway in that regard. But every action within the FoodWise program measures itself against the increase in value to the Irish food and agriculture industry. So I won't go into details of how big we are. We're not that big, but we are the 5th largest beef exporter in the world, which makes it quite unusual because we're quite small. We've about, well, these are the figures here. The industry as a whole is worth about 3.7 billion euros. Now, if you're an export country like yourselves here and ourselves in Ireland, these are the type of things you're meeting. And these were mentioned earlier this morning, But I mean, you're up against selling beef whereby you're accused of wasting 1,000 gallons of water, 45 pounds of grain, 30 square feet of forestry, 10 pounds of CO2 production, and one animal. So that in itself puts you on the back foot before you go anywhere. So again, our industry focuses on very much our green image, and particularly our Origin Green strategy, which all food companies, but particularly the beef sector, has embraced. So there's a whole carbon footprint and monitoring that's going on from farm. It's being collected by ourselves in Teagasc, by the Department of Agriculture, and even by our genomic breeding federation, which is called ICBF. So there's a big database there of inputs and outputs in terms of grass growth, milk production, and beef production. But it's very much to maintain the carbon footprint. So why is it difficult to transfer knowledge to the meat processing sector? And again, in your own strategy that I read over the last few weeks, you've recognized one of the issues. It's the complex configuration of the industry itself. It's the structure. It's also the nature of the beast. Beef is not like, as I said, a widget or a piece of software. It's sort of degrading all the time. And that makes it quite challenging to organize. In terms of the consumers, people know a lot more about meat than they do about software or airplane wings or medicines. So that's another challenge. And then the education needs and training needs of the industry itself. And I see that's been addressed very much by yourselves here. And again, old stories, old wives' tales about beef and production and animal welfare, you name it. Is there a scientific basis for most of those? And I think, again, there's a challenge that the scientists are great at talking to themselves, but do they talk to other people? And equally the same with the industry. And I'll touch on that a bit more later on. So our pressure is that if we're in the public sector provider of research, these are the attributes we want to be. We want never to compromise on the science. We want innovative knowledge transfer. We want relationship, network building. We want a responsive service. That's one of the things we used to hear from the industry quite a bit, that our organization was like the Titanic, very slow to respond, too much paperwork, and just not in their list of priorities in terms of the scientists' career development. They get more bang for their buck by publishing papers than talking to the industry. And we've changed a lot of those metrics within our career development. So they're the 4 goals, but the last one I want to mention, one thing that's missing, certainly in Europe, is an entrepreneurial culture of the scientific community. A lot of them are based in laboratories doing, I wouldn't say civil service type work, they're doing excellent science, but have they got that entrepreneurial knowledge, spirit, culture? And that's something that we're working on very much so. So the barriers we see are these, and I won't mention them all, they'll be listed. But particularly, can the industry assimilate new information? And whose responsibility is it for them to do that? Is it the scientists or is it the actual industry themselves? And of course, the answer is both. You have to be receptive and you have to be proactive. So that's something we're working on. And the lack of effectiveness of interactions. A lot of the research, as I mentioned, we did in Ireland previously, was where the industry sat around the table, nodded their head, said that'd be interesting, that might be interesting. But was it really effective? Did they take ownership, intellectual ownership of the results, or indeed of the research itself? And one of the best ways we see in improving that is the early involvement of the industry in the proposal phase, as opposed as to the end result. So we really try and get industry leaders to come in at the early stage. I mentioned this already about the consumer awareness, the fragmented industry, and also it's a very conservative industry. It's not open to huge innovations, big step change in innovations. And I'm not only talking about the industry in that regard, I'm talking about the consumers' attitudes to beef and meat in general. They don't want huge different innovations. So that in itself presents a challenge. So what's needed for for excellent knowledge in terms of innovation? Well, human capital is the main thing. And we often call that the contact sport. It's a one-to-one dynamic between the knowledge provider and the knowledge extractor. In other words, the industry and the scientist. And that's something that's critical for to succeed. So we have our own strategy in Teagasc, in our own organization. Again, I won't go into great detail in it, but one thing I do mention, and we are public servants in terms of the research we do, but every researcher's responsibility is to do something with their results. In other words, not to leave them on a shelf and move on to the next project, which is a common phenomenon in public research. You really need to do something with the results, take ownership, take responsibility, and either, if it's public good research, make sure it's widely known, and if there's IP involved, then seek a partner or a group of partners to transfer. So one thing we started with, and I won't go into great detail on this, is actually what is available. And even within our own organization, it took us about 3 years to know what actually was available in our own organization in terms of the research. So we did develop what we call the technology marketing portfolio, and I'm just going to give a few pages from that, but we really found this very useful for the industry. We call them offers, is where from research that's either ongoing or more than likely in terms of an offer is a finished project, there's a bit of IP available for the industry to take up if they so wish. An update is to make sure the industry has recent results as the project is continuing or immediately after it's finished. They need to know the expertise. I'm always shocked at how many industry guys don't know exactly what Teagasc does, even in Ireland. And we're not that big, as I said. And it's often underestimated by the research providers, the lack of knowledge of the industry, of who does what capacity is available, and what results are available. And then some specialist services we do, but most of all, we've listed then our researchers. We've now done a more innovative aspect, which is developed a customer relationship management strategy, whereby we're linking in direct companies with key PIs, key principal investigators. And that's work in progress, is what I'd say. We have events like the AMPC in terms of events like this. But if we had an event like this in Ireland, and we had one recently, we generally would have technologies available all outside. And these would be real offers to the industry. Not criticizing this by any means, but we've run about 12 of these at the moment. And 2 companies and many collaborative research initiatives have come from dealing with these, from meeting the researchers with the technology. We don't allow them display scientific posters, and that was a hard job because they all wanted to do their scientific. More research is needed, 20 references at the bottom. That meant nothing to the industry. They just have a picture of a piece of meat or the technology, and they get going and talking. So our research priorities are listed there. There's no big surprises, except GRAS is very much involved in the work we do. And I'm not going to go into any detail of any one of these technologies, but E. coli, farm to fork is critical. DNA markers, the health benefits of grass, the tenderness, the biochemical underpinning of meat tenderness, predicting beef eating quality, and we very much work with Rod in that regard. Air contamination, biomarkers for grass authenticity, E. coli again, and then downstream waste streams, and looking for the nutraceutical, the biomarker for ingredients, healthier meat products, retail packaging, healthy foods, healthy meat products, high pressure. I think Robin is going to talk more about details, but that's been used by some of the companies now. So some of these emerging technologies are going into companies. Novel processing technologies. So graphically, that pre-competitive research is much of what I spoke up to now. The industry do their own research. What's really needed is that bit in the middle, that translation of pre-competitive research by government and then joint collaboration. And that's where it's actually less funded. And that's why we've developed a phenomenon in Ireland called Technology Research Centre. And these centres have these things. It's where the industry with the researchers prioritise a list of areas for research. It's owned by the industry, it's industry-led. They put some money on the table, the government put 4 times as much money on the table. And they bid for who can deliver it. So we've just started a meat technology centre worth about 9 million euros. And that hasn't, well, we've appointed the director, we have the programme ready to go. We're only launching it in January or February of 17. So these are the aims of that, is to become a global player on the competitiveness in the area of meat production and research. And that allows better value for and adding value from what's already in the landscape. And it's towards the paradigm I mentioned earlier. And one thing also, and I know I'm being waved at there, is the value of that to the industry. Because if the industry put so much money there, not only will the government match it, but they're now dealing with researchers that have much more money to leverage, whether it's background knowledge or new collaborative research. So the conclusions then is all about communication. And I must commend the AMPC for exactly recognizing communication is the sole, one of the vital ingredients for this whole area of knowledge transfer and a competitive, more sustainable meat industry. The industry should be more proactive, and I say that in a general sense globally, rather than reactive to BSE, to E. coli, etc. They should be going out saying how good meat is for you, particularly beef. We all know in this room how good it is. It was classified as a functional food by the US not too long ago, but yet you won't see that in the papers. So they need to be more proactive. The international benchmarking we're doing is obviously, and I made this slide a long time ago, is actually here with the MLA, with the AMPC, with Texas, etc. And I think we are collectively with Texas Tech University, one of the most, the guys in this area. Now, of course, I should mention New Zealand, and I'll mention New Zealand at the end. But the conclusion, I'd say, a dynamic and collaborative research and innovation landscape are vital elements of a sustainable meat sector. And I told you I'd mention New Zealand. Okay, so you're invited to Cork next year.